Well, this morning, first home buyers are divided on Scott Morrison's new policy that would enable them to dip into their superannuation for a house deposit. Prospective borrowers are now weighing up the pros and the cons.
Yep, seems everyone's got an opinion on this. Joining us to discuss, Executive Chairman of Yellow Brick Road Home Loans, Mark Bouris. Mr Bouris, thanks for coming in, sir. Is this the glimmer of hope that young Aussies, have been waiting for, do you think?
It's just another policy. It's election time. It's a good policy, to be frank with you, but equally the Labor policy has its pros and cons as well. So anything that can help a young buyer get into the property market right now is a good one.
Yeah. Which one of the two housing policies pegged at first home buyers do you think is the best one in the long term?
Long term, I'd like to own my own house. I would like, if I was talking to one of my kids, I'd say I'd rather you own your own property. I'd rather you, if you could, release superannuation to go and buy that property. The big thing about releasing superannuation is this. When I take 50 grand out of my super fund, I then go and borrow, let's say, $500,000. I'm actually leveraging the bank's money as well. So I'm using my $50,000 to leverage someone else's money to make a profit on the thing that I bought for, say, in this example, $550. That's a big deal. That's why I probably prefer the coalition's policy.
And you're not having to pay interest on that 50 grand that you otherwise would have had to borrow from someone like your good self, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
No, but by the way, the Labor Party policy is pretty good too, because you don't have to borrow 60%. They're going to give you 40%.
Yeah.
The only problem with that is one day you might earn over a certain level and you've got to pay it back.
The government owns some of your house.
That for us as Australians isn't a great feeling, but nonetheless, it's good policy. And by the way, I've got to say this, you don't have to do either.
No, that's right.
You can go and save the money. These are not compulsory things.
No.
So both of them are great offerings.
So what are the long-term impacts and implications of taking 50 grand out of your super at an early stage in your career and losing out on that compound interest?
That's a very good question, Sylvia, and the big issue has been about compound interest, compound interest. 50 grand in your super should, over time, compound. In other words, you earn interest on interest on interest and interest until you turn 65 and you're retired. That's quite a lot of money. And, you know, like, largely you can make over every 10 years, you can double your dough. But I made the point earlier. If you take $50,000 out of your super and then you go and borrow from the bank another 500 grand or 450,000, you are leveraging the bank's money. And then if, assuming the property market goes up at, say, 6% per annum, you actually do much better than you would do if you left your money and got the compound interest. It's the leverage that's a big deal.
Yeah, the criticism of this is that it's going to drive up property prices, drive up real estate and fuel buyer demand. You agree with that?
No. I don't cop it. Like, there's just not a big enough or large enough cohort of people who will go and take the 50 grand out of the super or take the Labor Party's policy and then become part of the first home buyer group, which is a very small percentage of the total group anyway. So every month in my business, we lend mostly to investors or people going from one house to another house. A small percentage of it goes to first home buyers. So I don't think, and then of that small percentage, only a small percentage will take the 50 grand out of the super or take the Labor Party's policy. So I don't think it's enough to drive demand to push prices up.
OK, more interest rate rises are a sure thing. We know that. What are they going to do to property prices?
Well, I gave an example the other day. If you're a couple on $150,000, one party is full-time worker, the other one is a part-time worker, you have two kids, you can borrow $26,000 less after the last rate rise compared to before that. If we get another rate rise and they're saying 0.4% in June, right, you'll be able to borrow $75,000 less than you could 2 months ago. Now, all that means is I've got $75,000 less to spend on a property. So I'm going to pay $75,000 less. So that property...
If you can find a property.
If I can find a property. So all that's going to have to happen now here is the vendors are going to have to meet the buyer's market. And that is starting to happen very, very quickly. At the moment.
So prices will come down?
Prices must come down because buyers don't have the same amount of money they had before.
And if sellers want to sell, they've got to sell to someone who wants to buy, right?
Yeah. Eventually they'll meet the market.
Yeah, very good. Interesting.
Always good to chat to you, Mark. Thanks for coming in.
You can check out Mark's new video series, Property Insights, with Mr Mark Bouris. Head to Why Home Loans for more information.
He knows his stuff.
He does know his stuff, doesn't he? Great advice.